Let me tell you a story about Mr. United States. Mr. United States decided he wanted to explore a new part of the world. And so he left the old country, crossed the ocean, and landed on the shores of a new continent. He settled down, he made roots, and then he said to his 50 sons, "It's time to explore." And he sent out the sons. Some of them stayed close to home where they had landed, like New York and New Jersey and Vermont. Some of his sons were more adventurous and made it to the Great Lakes, like Indiana and Ohio and Mr. Michigan. The Dakota twins made it a little bit further. A couple were adventurous, crossing great distances all the way to Alaska, and even the bravest of all getting on a boat to a place called Hawaii. And then those sons had sons like Sacramento and Los Angeles. And now, this is not how we tell history, right? It sounds a little silly. But in the ancient world, often history became a family. Territories and peoples and tribes became individuals. The Torah is full of origin myths, where the rainbow comes from, why humanity wears clothing and doesn't like snakes. In fact, immediately after the conclusion of the Torah portion we're talking about today, you traditionally would go on to read the first Torah portion, Bereshit, the creation in the beginning, the first few chapters of Genesis, which explain male and female and light and dark and sun and moon and animals and all of these, how things came to be, even murder in the first few chapters. So it's an origin book, a book of origin stories. But it's also an origin myth for peoples too, including the nation of Israel. And one example of an origin story not for children is what happens to Lot, Abraham's nephew. Lot lives in a town called Sodom, which is deemed to be wicked. And so he flees with his family. His wife makes the mistake of looking back and turns into a pillar of salt, which is an origin story for the Dead Sea, which is so full of salt in that Judean desert. And the Judean desert's origin story is the destruction of Sodom with fire from heaven. That's how it got so burned and so dry. Lot and his daughters wind up in a cave. And they're convinced they're the only people left in the world. And so the daughters decide that they need to repopulate humanity. And who do they have to work with but their father, Lot? And we know from the earlier narrative, when he offered them to the wicked people of the town, his daughters have never slept with a man. So they get him drunk, and they sleep with him. The first daughter produces a child she names Ben-Ami, and the other one names her child Moav, from my father. And these become the ancestors of the Ammonite people and the Moabite people. Now that's the Judean, the Jewish version of where the Moabites and the Ammonites came from. Do you think the Moabites and the Ammonites would tell that story about themselves? Probably not. But for the Judeans, who were enemies of the Ammonites and the Moabites, they're bastards. They're the children of incest. They've been corrupt from the beginning. So the origin stories are not just for features of humanity, they're also for the peoples among whom the Hebrews lived, and even stories for themselves. Remember, Abraham has Isaac, but also Ishmael, and Ishmael becomes the ancestor of the Bedouin Arab peoples. Isaac has two sons as well. The older son is named Esau, but Esau has a second name. His second name is Edom, which is thought to derive from the color red, because he has red hair all over him. But the Edomites are another people living in this area that are enemies of the Israelites. The younger son, if Esau is the older son, the younger son is Jacob. But Jacob also gets another name. Jacob becomes Israel. He wrestles with the angel or God at night, and he gets a new name called the one who wrestles with God, Israel. Mr. America, Mr. United States, Israel, 50 sons, 12 sons. And 12 sons who are later identified with 12 regions of a nation called Israel. We do have parallels to this. We don't imagine that everybody was descended from the founding fathers, but we still refer to founding fathers. If you sing the song, "My Country 'Tis of Thee," "Land Where My Fathers Died," doesn't matter if you're an immigrant, you can sing that song. You've adopted this peoplehood, this identity with this country. Land of the Pilgrim's Pride. Pilgrims are a long way back. They are not my ancestors, but they are the ancestors of the national family. So Israel, or Jacob, accumulates 12 sons from 4 different women. He actually has 2 wives and 2 concubines. I want to briefly show you his family tree, such as it is, so you can get a picture of the descendants. So here you have Leah and Rachel. Those are the full wives. They're actually his cousins because he marries sort of within the family. You'll see that Leah has 6 sons. Leah's servant, Zilpah, has 2 sons, Gad and Asher. Rachel, who's actually Jacob's favored wife, only has 2 sons. Joseph, you can tell by the multicolored dream coat, right? And Benjamin. And Bilhah, who is Rachel's maid, whom she sends to Jacob when she's unable to have children, also produces 2 sons. I remember once I was talking about this story and someone said, "Wow, that sounds a lot like The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood." And I said, guess where she got the story from? They even quote from the Bible. If you read the original novella, they quote from this passage describing what happens in the Jacob saga, with the maidens going in to produce children. So Jacob is seen as this patriarch, literally, of an entire clan of his own. But of course, each of these sons has children and their own descendants and so on, and ultimately become their own nation as a whole and tribes within the nation. At the end of the book of Genesis, the family moves to Egypt. Remember, Joseph is sent into slavery in Egypt. Eventually, he tricks his brothers and he manages to bring them down and to bring Jacob and his family down with him. The entire clan moves to Egypt and they grow into a great nation. The 12 sons become the ancestors of 12 tribes, depending how you count, as we'll see. Now, what happens at the beginning of the book of Exodus? Very famous first line. Then arose a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. All the social credibility that Joseph had built is gone. With the new Pharaoh, the Israelites become enslaved. And after a series of trials and wonders, divine revelation, Moses intervening, they escape from slavery. They wander in the desert for 40 years. They receive divine laws, and they finally reach the edge of the promised land on the east bank of the River Jordan. Interestingly enough, in the Torah, it refers to the east bank of the River Jordan, what today is the Kingdom of Jordan, not Israel proper. It refers to that as the other side of the Jordan, because the author was writing from the west side. The author was writing from Israel today, looking over, not writing contemporaneous to the events happening from the east side, because he would have said on this side of the Jordan. He said on that side of the Jordan because he was looking that way. So we have this sort of pause in the narrative. They've reached the verge of the promised land. And now, what happens? Moses gives his last farewell speech. It goes on and on and on and on. It depends, though, which Jewish tradition you're following as to whether you think this is the end of this Torah or not. Because there's a group, an offshoot of Jewish culture called the Samaritans, who actually have what's called a hexateuch. They have 6 books in their Torah, not a Pentateuch for 5. And the last book in the Samaritan Torah is the book of Joshua, because it doesn't end on the other side of the Jordan. It ends after the conquest of the Jordan. And we'll talk a little bit about why the Samaritan Torah ends that way, why it doesn't end with this as the valedictory speech of Moses. But of course, we have to remember the backstory to this. This narrative claims that the descendants of the sons of Jacob become the tribes of Israel and become a nation through this wandering in the desert. It's like a formative experience for the national narrative. And then they're assigned certain properties in the land of Israel, in the promised land. But in reality, it probably was the opposite. There were tribes in certain regions of this land, and they decided to create political alliances with each other. And so they might have made smaller coalitions that claimed a common matriarch. All the tribes that had a common mother in the narrative. And then there may have been others that claimed a patriarch. We'll see there's 2 who both claim to be descended from Joseph. We found in many cultures that people create political alliances through genealogy. Some do it through marrying. You know, you have your kid marries their kid, and that's how you ally the kingdoms. We still have that in Europe all the time. But in this case, sometimes you work it backwards. And you say, we're not just allies, we're actually cousins. We have a common ancestor, sometimes called an eponymous ancestor, whose name stands for the nation. It's one of the reasons why there are many stories in the Torah that repeat themselves, where Isaac hides his wife as his sister, and Abraham hides his wife as his sister, and Joseph hides his wife as his sister. I mean, it happens, or sorry, Jacob hides a wife as a sister. It happens multiple times in multiple generations, probably as a result of this combination of ethnic heritage and story into one political nation. So, with that overview, I want to jump into the text for this, but I'm going to share it along with a map as well. All right. So we have on the left, you can see a map of the tribes of Israel, right? The descendants, all those children, and the territories that they are assigned according to the rulings in Deuteronomy. You might also notice to the east of God, you see Ammon, the Ammonites. Remember those bastards? They're there. To the south of Reuben, you see Moab, the other bastards. They're over there. To the east of Simeon and Judah, we have Edom. Remember those people? Yeah, we've got those too. And to the west of Judah, we have a place called Philistia, where the Philistines live, including one of their capital cities, Gaza. Still in the news even today. Today, though, the line is drawn where Ashkelon and Ashdod are in Israel proper. Joppa is another word for Haifa. That's where it comes from. But if you go further north, what is today Tyre, or Tsur in that world, is now in Lebanon. So these boundaries go a little bit further up. Sidon also is in Lebanon. So it goes further north than we would have in our map of Israel today, but it's largely the same territory. But you'll also notice some of the tribes are on the east side of the River Jordan, what is today the Kingdom of Jordan. And you can see the towns like Bethlehem, Hebron, Jericho. These are all in what today is the West Bank. Shechem is another one. That's near Nablus in the Palestinian Authority. This is the heartland of sort of the birthplace of the Jewish people, which is why the settler movement is so attached to it, because they claim roots going back to these people that they claim as people. But you'll see that there's some sites on the east side, and where we are set in this moment is Mount Nebo. You see that triangle? That's where Moses is overlooking the land and giving his final speech. So it's a geographic overview of what we're going to talk about. So it begins it's only a chapter and a half. It's a relatively short Torah portion. This is the blessing with which Moses, God's agent, literally it says Ish HaElohim, the man of God, or man of the gods, if you translated it that way, clearly a divine connected person, said farewell to the Israelites before his death. He said, Yahweh came from Sinai and shone on them from Seir. Yahweh appeared from Mount Paran and approached from Ribeot Kodesh. Lightning flashed at them from God's right hand, from his Yamin. Now, what's interesting here is it claims that the Hebrew God has a place. He came from this place, Sinai, and maybe he came with us. Remember, they went to the mountain. They received the revelation. They saw the thunder and the fire, but maybe that was the home of the God. And now the God moves with them. One of the interesting themes in the Torah as a whole, but especially the end, is do you end with the people wandering, or do you end with the people about to come home, or do you end with the people already home? This text was probably written and finalized by people who were returning from Babylonian exile around 515 before the Common Era. And so the best setting for them was not to continue to be wandering because they were going home. But it wasn't to already be in the land because they were on their way. They were planning the move. The best framing for them in a narrative was to say, even our God came from somewhere else, but is setting down roots where he belongs, just as we are. Lover indeed of the people, their hallowed are all in your hand. They follow in your steps, accepting your pronouncements. It's a two-way deal. You love us, we love you, we do what you say, tell us what to do. Oh, it's a nice poem. When Moses charged us with the teaching, the word for teaching is literally Torah. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah commanded us teaching. Moses commanded us a teaching. Now, there is an irony here. Where is this line written? In the Torah. So does it make sense for the Torah to say, Moses commanded us the Torah? In the Torah? Well, if you assume the word Torah always means these 5 books, then it doesn't make sense. But remember, the word Torah also means teaching. The modern Hebrew word morah is a teacher. So Torah, morah, it's a teaching, it's lessons, it's wisdom, it's life. It doesn't have to be this book in all of its complexities, as we'll see in chapter 34. As the heritage, the inheritance of the congregation of, notice it doesn't say Israel, the Kehilot Yaakov, the congregation of Jacob, because Jacob and Israel, and we'll also see a name Yeshurun. There's various names that are deployed to reference the collective. Just as we might say United States, America, we have other words for it too. And then God became king in Yeshurun, that is king of this people, when the heads of the people assembled, the tribes of Israel all together. So here we have that reference to the tribes. They're assembling to create the nation. And who's in charge? Not a human king. It's a divine king. And who are the messengers of divine kings? It's a body that I belong to called clergy, right? Clergy are the people who speak for God. God is not good at responding to messages or memos. So you need representatives on earth, and the representatives of the God are the clergy. They could be prophets, they could be priests, they could be holy men and wonder workers, but they communicate what the God wants you to do, and if you want to talk to the God, you work through them and do what they tell you to do. When it says that God became king, it's in place of a human king. You don't need a human king if you've got good clergy who are connecting you with a good divine king. And so now we begin to see a series of blessings for each of these tribes. It begins, may Reuven live and not die, even though few be his numbers. So you notice Reuben here, before it was a sandwich. Reuben is living on the east side of the Dead Sea. That is not a particularly fertile area in the world, right? Judean desert, salt water, doesn't support a large population. So it's actually geographically appropriate that their blessing says they'll do well, but there won't be that many of them because that territory simply doesn't support it. And there are obviously much bigger territories out there. He said this of Judah. Hear, Yahweh, the voice of Judah, and restore him to his people. Though his own hands strive for him, help him against his foes. So Judah sounds like a militarist tribe, one that fights and that wants divine assistance in doing the fighting. And you'll notice that many of the most important cities in the territory are in Judah. You've got Hebron, which is the birthplace of the burial place of Abraham. You've got Bethlehem, the birthplace of David. Okay, very important territory here. And also the border with the Philistines, which is also important. Of Levi, he said, let your Tumim and Urim be with your faithful one, whom you tested at Massah, challenged at the waters of Meribah, who said of his father and mother, I consider them not. His brother is disregarded. He ignored his own children. Your precepts alone they observed and kept your covenant. They shall teach your laws to Jacob and your instructions to Israel. They will offer incense to savor and whole offerings for your altar. So what's odd about Levi? Well, if you look at the map, you might notice there ain't no Levi. There's no territory for Levi. Well, the Levites were seen to be a tribe of priests. They were a holy tribe, and so their income, their food and revenue, as such as it was, came from the offerings that were being made to the gods. And initially, the Levites, in fact, were nomadic. They offered offerings in the various territories, but they were the clan of priests. They didn't have their own territory. Their portion was from the other people's produce. Later on, they get concentrated when there's only one place for them to worship the gods in Jerusalem. So the Levites become concentrated there. And even today, if you know anyone whose last name is Levine, Levin, right? These are claimed descendants of these. And a subset of the Levi tribe is a clan that claims descendants from Aaron. Those are the Cohens and the Kahans. And in the subset of that group is the line of the high priests, which is Cohen Sedek, or as an acronym, CATS, or Catsmen, or anything like that. So the Levites are the broader group of all the temple attendants, the Cohens are the subset, and the Catses are the smaller one, but Levi doesn't get its own territory. It certainly gets a blessing, a special blessing, a long blessing, about being priests and directly relating to God, but they don't have their own territory to inherit in the promised land. Bless his substance, favor his undertakings, smite the loins of his foes, let his enemies rise no more. So Levi is a very important role. Of Benjamin, he said, now notice Benjamin's territory, relatively small. Right? Benjamin's the last of the children. He's the youngest of all the 12 brothers. But a very important territory, because what city is in there? Jerusalem. And Jericho will become important for the conquest story too. This is the heartland of the kingdom in later generations. It's where the temple will be housed. So Benjamin is beloved of Yahweh. This is an especially important territory. He rests securely beside God, who protects him always, as he rests between God's shoulders. Like he's on, like a little kid on God's shoulders. That's how protected this space should be. And of Joseph, he said, Joseph's one of the 12 sons, right? Of Joseph, he said, blessed of Yahweh be his land, with the bounty of dew from heaven and of the deep that couches below. Did you notice there's no Joseph on this map either? Now, Joseph is actually blessed through his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. When Joseph is living in Egypt, he actually marries the daughter of an Egyptian priest. There's a whole other story about that. And he has two sons, and when Jacob is dying, he blesses Ephraim and Manasseh as the sons of Joseph, so they become the inheritors. This also helps the math. Remember, there's supposed to be 12 tribes, 12 territories, and there's 12 sons. Except one of the sons, Levi, doesn't have any territory. So you're going to have 12 territories and 11 sons? Joseph split into Ephraim and Manasseh. Now we've got 12 territories for 12 eponymous ancestors, even though they're not all brothers. because Ephraim and Manasseh are a little bit younger. Okay. But also notice the territory. Manasseh is really successful. Look how big that is. Both sides of the river, all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, and some major cities. And Ephraim is the glue connecting Manasseh to Jerusalem. These are very important territories, and some of the most fertile territories that you'll find.
Can you show that? Where is that exactly?
Manasseh is right here, this big yellow passage here, and Ephraim is right below it. Yeah, these are really important territories. Shiloh is there, Bethel, Ai is an important city. We have Shechem, as I mentioned before, a capital of the north. So when it blesses Joseph, in the passage it's really blessing Ephraim and Manasseh, those tribes who made their own political alliance through the line of Joseph. Okay. With the bounteous yield of the sun and the bounteous crop of the moons, with the best from the ancient mountains and the bounty of hills and memorial. This is the fertile hill country and the coastal plain. I mean, it's really got everything you'd want in this territory. If you look at a satellite map, you'll see this is a lot of green in these spaces. With the bounty of earth in its fullness and the favor of the presence in the bush. Remembering the bush story, burning bush story. May these rest on the head of Joseph, on the crown of the elect of his brothers. Remember, Joseph is the one that's in charge at the end of that story in Genesis. Like a firstling bull in his majesty, he has horns like the horns of the wild ox, and with them he gores the people. The ends of the earth, one and all. These are the myriads of Ephraim. Those are the thousands of Manasseh. So here we have Joseph equals Manasseh and Ephraim, just like Israel equals all the tribes. It's a family story. And of course, they're strong, and they can fight. Now of Zebulun, he says, now again, notice these are northern tribes, a little more rural, perhaps, a little further away from the heartland. Of Zebulun, he says, rejoice on your journeys, Issachar in your tents. So these are sort of an aside. They're even combined, Zebulun and Issachar, in one blessing. They invite their kin to the mountains, where they offer sacrifices of success, for they draw from the riches of the sea and the hidden hoards of the sand. So they're living in this territory between the mountains and the sea, and they have to draw sustenance and support from both. And then of God, who's living on the east side here of the River Jordan, he said, blessed be the one who enlarges God. Poised is he like a lion to tear off arm and scalp. He chose for him the best, for there is the portion of the revered chieftain, where the heads of the people come. He executes Yahweh's judgments and God's decisions for Israel. So, again, an important role. And you hear the militaristic language, right? We're going to conquer, defeat the enemy. And of Dan, he said, now Dan is down here by the coast, but actually there's some narratives that describe Dan as moving, because Dan used to be down here, but guess who showed up? The Philistines. So then Dan is conquered by the Philistines, and they wind up moving all the way to the north, even north of Naphtali, I think. But initially they're down here, and they're a coastal people. Joppa, Haifa, right, major city. Of Dan, he said, Dan is a lion's whelp that leaps forth from Bashan. Commentary again. And that's it, just a couple lines on Dan. Of Naphtali, which is again further north. Of Naphtali, he said, Naphtali, sated with favor and full of Yahweh's blessing, take possession on the west and the south. So they're expanding their territory a little bit further out each time. And that's conquering from other peoples. The Arameans are in the north, and they're able to expand their territory. And of Asher, who has the coastal plain here, he said, most blessed of sons be Asher. May he be the favorite of his brothers. May he dip his foot in oil. May your doorbolts be iron and copper, and security last all of your days. See, they are the gateway to the people. They have to have a secure guarding. They're also conquering for the first time territory that belonged to the Canaanites. The Canaanites tended to live along the coastal plain, and Asher and Manasseh are taking territory from them. O Yeshurun, this is for the whole nation, there is none like God, riding through the heavens to help you, through the skies in his majesty. The ancient God is a refuge, a support are the arms everlasting. He drove out the enemy before you by his command, Hashmed, destroy. Do you understand why there are some people in the current Israeli government coalition who do not want to make peace? Because they have promises like this. They have confidence that their God is with them, and anything they pursue to do against their enemies, they can succeed. Because with God on our side, what could go wrong? And he commands us, destroy, drive out the enemy before you. They want to reconquer Gaza and expel the Palestinians and settle it. And the West Bank. That's part of their mission as they see the land being promised to them. And they see that's important for safety, as it says here. Thus Israel dwells in safety. Untroubled is Jacob's abode, in a land of grain and wine under heaven's dripping dew. If we had only expelled them, if we could only expel them now, and it's all ours, everything would be as it's meant to be. O happy Israel, who is like you, a people delivered by Yahweh, your protecting shield, your sword triumphant. Your enemies shall come cringing before you, and you will tread on their backs. Submission, or what posture are they in when you can step on their backs? Dead on their faces, right? Flat on the ground. So this is a blessing of the tribes, but for victory, not for peace, for conquest, not good business. This is imagining coming into this land and claiming it, and then being able to pass it on to your heirs. But now the narrative turns from speaking to the nation and promising things to them to the character of Moses. I'll also point out, by the way, in that list of tribes, there's one tribe that wasn't blessed. It's the tribe that lives within the tribe of Judah. It's called Simeon or Shimon. It's not blessed in this listing of the tribes. Did Moses forget? Were the Shimeonites on the outs of the writers of the text? Did they figure, well, we got to 12, if you count a certain way, because you got Ephraim and Manasseh, and you've got Levites, so it's not clear. It's one of those mysteries of how it happened. Some people try to explain it. They talk about some of the stories about Shimon and some of the violence he perpetrated, but Levi perpetrated the same violence and he gets a blessing. So it's not entirely clear to me. In any case, Moses went up from the plains of Moab, again, plains of Moab down here, up to Mount Nebo, right near the Dead Sea, to the summit of Pisgah opposite Jericho. See, Mount Nebo, Jericho, put them right there on the map. And Yahweh showed him the whole land, from Gilead as far as Dan, so that's from the north down to the south, all of Naphtali, that's all the way up here. I mean, look, from Mount Nebo, that's quite a view. From the Dead Sea to the Sea of Galilee. The land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea. So from that peak, it was the clearest day possible, and he shows him everything, the entire land. The Negev, that's the desert in the south where Judah and Shimon are. And the plain, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. And then Yahweh said to him, this is the land which I promised, which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will assign it to your offspring. I promised them their children would inherit it. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you shall not cross here. Why? Well, there's a story that's told earlier in the Torah that God tells Moses to bring forth water from a rock by striking it. Actually, no. God says, just talk to the rock and the water will come. And how does Moses get the rock out? He talks to the rock and bangs it twice with his stick, and then water comes out. And Yahweh says, for that you don't get to enter the land. Because he was supposed to demonstrate faith, the power of Yahweh, not the power of Moses. If he hits the rock, people think Moses did it. So God's a bit jealous, maybe, of Moses. But that's a cover story. That's not actually why Moses doesn't get to enter the land. On one level, on a narrative level, Moses has fulfilled his purpose. What was his purpose? It was to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. It was to lead the people through the wilderness. It was to bring them to the promised land. And sometimes the Savior doesn't get to live into Act 2. Right? He has brought them to the point, and then he needs to exit stage left. But there's another reason, as we'll see, why Moses doesn't get to enter. So Moses, the servant of Yahweh, died there in the land of Moab at the command of Yahweh. And he buried him. It actually doesn't say in the Hebrew who did the burying. It just says, and he buried him. But the implication is that God himself buried Moses in a valley in the land of Moab near Beth Peor, and no one knows his burial place to this day. Again, this is a hint of it being written later, because if somebody was writing it the next day, you wouldn't say no one knows his burial place to this day from Tuesday, you know. So it's clearly written later, but also, why do you think it's important that no one knows his burial place? Well, think of it the counterfactual. What if you did know his burial place? What do you think would happen there? Tour guides, souvenirs, a shrine, a holy man, even a saint, right? There is one place that the Hebrew God is going to cause his name to dwell. And Moses was the vehicle for God. There's a reason why Moses doesn't appear in the Passover Haggadah at all. Because it's not about him. He's the loudspeaker. He's the machine. He's the fulfiller. But the real power is the Hebrew God. And there's a third reason why his burial place is a secret, and I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were undimmed, his vigor unabated. You know, halavai for any of us, right? And the Israelites bewailed Moses. Literally, they cried for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. And then the period of wailing and mourning for Moses came to an end. So we have here a kind of documentary evidence of mourning practices. That maybe when a very important figure died, you mourned for 30 days. And there is actually a tradition in Jewish life of certain mourning rituals that happen for 7 days, called Shiva, and certain mourning rituals that happen for 30 days, called the Shloshim, which means 30. And when you have a parent who dies because of honoring the dead, but also honor your mother and father, you take the 7-day ritual and you do it for 30 days. You take the 30-day ritual and you do it for a year. So it'd make it doubly mourning for them. But this is one of those roots for that 30-day ritual is this particular text, a day of wailing, a period of wailing, but then also, even for Moses, you have to get up. You have to go on. You have to live. You can't live in mourning forever. Now Joshua, the son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands upon him. Literally uses the word samach, like a smicha, an ordination. And the Israelites listened to him, doing as Yahweh had commanded Moses. So here you have the heir is designated before you step off screen. But you have to make room for that heir. You have to sort of contract yourself as the leader or step off stage left to make room. And here in verse 10, this is why we don't know where Moses is buried. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, that knew God, the Hebrew says, that knew God, panim el panim, face to face. The translation tries to soften it, that Yahweh singled out face to face, because there's an argument within the Torah, can you see God or not? Some would say no, you can only see his back. Some would say you can't even see that. But some of them say Moses saw God face to face. And this passage says he did. But the point here is not the face to face, or rather, the face to face is emphasizing why Moses is so important. He was the best prophet ever. And here's why we don't get to know where he's buried. In the years leading up to the finalization of the Torah text, there were two groups of clergy claiming to speak for the Hebrew God. One were prophets who claimed to get visions and dreams and claimed, here's what God says, and they would pronounce it. And the other were priests. Priests and prophets could occasionally get along. But all too often, the prophets showed up and said to the people in charge, you're doing it wrong. Who were the people in charge? They were often the priests. They were the establishment who were saying, here's what God wants you to do, and it involves a lot of sacrifices that we get a percentage of. So it's an argument. What does God really want us to do? What the prophets are getting visions and maybe upsetting the order of things, or what the priests have told us that God already told us he wants us to do? If there's no shrine of Moses, if there's no school of Moses, if there's no place you can communicate with Moses, Moses has done all the communicating he's going to do. He wrote it down. And if the best prophet who ever lived wrote down the best prophecy we're ever going to get, we don't need prophets anymore. What we need are people who know how to read. And the people who know how to read are the priests, are the clergy. There is no line of Moses after Deuteronomy. There is a line of Aaron, because Aaron's grandson Zadok is established as a hereditary priesthood. And in later generations, they would call them the Zadokites or the Sadducees. They were the people who claimed descent from Aaron through his grandson Zadok, who is put into power by this very text in the Hebrew Bible, in the Torah. Moses was the best prophet ever, but we don't even know where he's buried. And so what do we have left? We have the book he wrote, which is the best prophecy ever. It even says it in an earlier part in Deuteronomy. If a future prophet shows up, check what the book says. And if it agrees with the book, then he's a true prophet. And if it disagrees with the book, he's a bad prophet. So who needs prophets? Bye-bye. What we have left is the book and the authority and the power. This is the national epic at the end of the Torah, that origin story for the Hebrew people and for the priesthood that's in charge. Tribes were assigned to territories. Didn't come out as easily in the book of Judges as it sounds like in the book of Joshua. They've had a revelation given through Moses that's been sealed and finished, and priestly rule has been established. All is right with the world, says the priest. But there's one level of this that's incomplete, and that's the human level of the character of Moses. Moses has led these people for 40 years, with 40 years of complaining and disobedience and rebellion and violence and threats and attacks from the outside and mutinies from the inside. Sometimes the people want to reject God. Sometimes God wants to reject the people. And Moses has been stuck in the middle this whole time. And at the end, he's told, look at all this they're getting, you're dead. Would it have been that simple? Do we have no compassion for what Moses might feel at that moment? Well, the biblical narrative is very sparse. It doesn't fill in those details. But the human imagination is richer than the biblical narrative. And so rabbis imagine what would have happened if God came to Moses and said, it is time for you to go. What might Moses have said in rebuttal? So I want to share with you some of the ideas that the rabbis created imagining what Moses might have said in response to the divine decree. This is in a collection called the Sefer Agadah, the Book of Legends, which was collected by Chaim Bialik and Yehoshua Ravnitsky in the early 20th century from rabbinic literature. When Moses realized that the decree of death had been sealed against him, he drew a small circle around himself and stood in it and said, "Master of the universe, I will not move from here until you cancel that decree." At the same time, he wrapped himself in sackcloth and strew ashes upon it and persisted in prayers and supplications before the Holy One until heaven and earth, everything made in the 6 days of creation, were shaken. And they said, well, perhaps the intention of the Holy One to remake the world is going to be executed. What did God do then? He had it proclaimed at every gate of the heavens that Moses' prayer not be accepted or be brought up to his presence, because the decree of Moses' death had been sealed. And yet, as the sound of Moses' prayer to God above grew even stronger, the Holy One summoned the ministering angels and commanded them, "Go in haste, bolt closed all the gates of the sky," for Moses' prayer was like a sword, ripping and tearing, and nothing could stop it. And if the prayer gets to the Holy One, you can't argue with Moses. In that instant, Moses said to God, "Master of the universe, known and revealed to you is the trouble and pain I suffered on account of Israel until they came to believe in your name. How much pain I suffered because of them until I could get them to believe the Torah and its precepts. I witnessed their woe, so I should be allowed to witness their reward. But now that their reward has come, you tell me you do not get to cross the Jordan. Thus your Torah, which says, in the same day you pay a worker his wages, you are turning into a fraud. I deserve this. I deserve seeing them with a happy ending. Is this the reward for 40 years of labor, that I labored until Israel became a holy people? God said, this is the decree that I have given. Moses said, if I'm not allowed to enter the land alive, at least let me enter dead, like the bones of Joseph that are being brought with us. Moses said, if you will not let me enter the land, at least let me remain alive like a beast of the field who eats grass and drinks water and enjoys the world. Can I be one of those? And God says, enough, stop. But Moses kept speaking. Master, if not like a beast of the field, then let me become like a bird that flies daily in every direction to gather its food, and in the evening returns to its nest. Let me be one of those. And God replies, enough. But Moses saw that his prayer was not being heeded. He went to implore directly to the heaven and the earth, asking them, entreat mercy on my behalf. And they said they could not. He went to the stars and the planets, entreat mercy on my behalf. And they replied, we cannot. He went to the mountains and the hills, entreat mercy, and they could not. He went to the sea, entreat mercy. And the sea replied, Son of Amram, why is this day different from earlier days? Are you not the one who came to me with your rod and smote me and split me into 12 pieces when I couldn't withstand you? This is the sea he parted. Now he wants a favor. Uh-oh. Then Moses went to the angel of the presence, entreat mercy that I not die. And the angel said, what can I do? I've heard from behind the curtain above, your prayer in this matter will not be heard. Moses put his hand on his head and lamented and wept. To whom shall I go to entreat mercy? In this instant, God was actually angry with Moses. And so Moses reminded, aren't you the God that's merciful and compassionate? And so then God calmed down. The Holy One said to Moses, Moses, I have sworn 2 oaths, one concerning Israel after they did that deed of the golden calf, that I would destroy them from the world, and the other that you are to die and not enter the land. The oath I swore concerning Israel to destroy them I put aside when you begged me. And now you ask me again that I put aside my oath to comply with your plea. You're pulling the well's rope at both ends. If you want to have Them, you can't have you. If you want to have you, you can't have them. When Moses heard this, he said, let Moses and 1,000 like him perish, but not the people of Israel. But Moses asks again. He can't let it go. Should the feet that went up into the sky, the face that saw your face, the hands that received the Torah from your hands, should these now lick the dust? Do I just disappear? God replied, this was my plan from the beginning. This is the way of the world. Each generation is to have its own interpreters of Scripture. Each generation has its own leaders. Each generation has its own providers. Until now, it has been your job to do this, but now Joshua's turn has come. It's time to move on. Each generation has its own teachers. So then God said to his angels, it is time for you to fetch the soul of Moses. He said to Gabriel, go forth and bring me the soul of Moses. And Gabriel said, he who is equal in importance to 60,000, how can I bear to watch him die? He said to the angel Michael, go and bring the soul of Moses. Michael said, I was his teacher and he was my student. How can I watch him die? Then the Holy One said to Samael, another angel, go and fetch the soul of Moses. Now the angel Samael, the chief of all the satanic spirits, had long been awaiting the soul of Moses. He was excited to grab it. He clothed himself with anger, girded on his swords, and went out to encounter Moses. He found him sitting and writing the name of God in a scroll, finishing up the Torah. The radiance of his appearance was like the radiance of the sun. He looked like an angel himself. And this demonic angel Samael was so frightened at the sight of Moses, he could not open his mouth to say anything. And so finally, Moses is able to expel Samael, who goes back and reports to God, I could not do it. He tries once more with his sword, and Moses becomes angry and takes the rod and strikes Samael with his might, and Samael flees away. But finally, a divine voice comes out and says, the time has come. You fought a good fight, but it's over. The time has come for you to depart from the world. Moses pleaded with God, Master of the universe, for my sake, remember the day you revealed yourself in a burning bush, the time I stood on Mount Sinai for 40 days and nights. Please do not give me to the angel of death. And so God says, do not fear, I will attend you and your burial. He asks one last chance to bless Israel, and they receive the blessing. The voice comes forth one more time. The moment has come for you to depart the world. And Moses said, blessed be the name, may he live and endure forever and ever. And he says to Israel, when you enter the land, remember me and my bones, and say, alas for the son of Amram, who ran before us like a horse, but his bones fell in the wilderness. And a voice came forth again. You can hear this voice sort of warning him, here it comes, here it comes. The voice came forth and says, within half a moment, you are to depart the world. Moses lifted both his arms, placed them over his heart, and called out to Israel, behold the end of flesh and blood. Moses arose and washed his own hands and feet, and became as pure as an angel. And then from the highest heaven of heavens, the Holy One came down to take the soul of Moses, and with him the ministering angels, Michael and Gabriel and Zagzael. Michael laid out his bier. Gabriel put a fine linen cloth at his head, and Zagzael put it at his feet. Michael on one side, Gabriel on the other. The Holy One said to Moses, Moses, close your eyes. And he closed his eyes. Put your arms over your breast, and he put his arms over his breast. Bring your legs together, and he brought his legs together. And then the Holy One summoned Moses' soul, saying, my daughter, I had fixed the time of your stay in the body of Moses at 120 years, and now your time has come to depart. Depart, no more delay, he says to the soul, which is like a daughter. And even the soul talks back. Master of the universe, you are God of all spirits. You created me and placed me in the body of Moses. Is there a body in the world more pure than his body? I love him and do not wish to leave him. Even his soul doesn't want to let it go. And then God says, leave. I will take you to the highest of high heavens, put you under the throne of glory next to the angels. And in that instant, the Holy One kissed Moses and took his soul with that kiss. And there was one more commentary. Remember, the claim is that Moses wrote the Torah. But what would it be like if you were Moses and you write about your own death? Could any of us do it? The rabbis imagined maybe Joshua wrote these last few verses about how great Moses was. After all, it does say earlier in the Torah that Moses was the humblest man who ever lived. So would the humblest man who ever lived write he was the best prophet ever? Maybe not. And of course, it's describing that people loved him for days to come, and how could he know? But maybe, speculate the rabbis, maybe Moses did write the end of his own story, but he wrote those last few lines through tears. I like that story. I like that creative wrestling over letting go and the end of life and a long, fruitful working relationship between a God and a mortal that comes to an end, as life does. This is the way of things. Leaders pass on, new leaders take hold. That's not in the Torah. That's in the Jewish imagination. But it's based on the Torah. It's like a flint that sparks and we get something new. Sometimes that's the best role the Torah provides in creating Jewish culture, is the spark, the flint, the beginning.